Welcome back to Grade 7 History, Unit Number 2, Conflicts and Challenges in Canada, 1800 to 1850. This is Lesson Number 17. How did the War of 1812 progress? Let's start off by considering the following. If the Americans were so confident about capturing Upper and Lower Canada, why weren't they successful? Before you go any further, I want you to put the video on pause so that you can write down your response to this question. All right, let's proceed. The War of 1812 was fought in North America for one reason. The British had the most powerful navy in the world, and the US knew it could never defeat Britain in a fight overseas. Fighting in the Canadas made more sense because the Americans had always wanted to take the colonies. On July 12, 1812, Brigadier General William Hull issued a proclamation to the colonists in Upper Canada. He was confident that the colonists would not oppose the Americans taking over Upper Canada, and he believed that Upper Canadians would see the Americans as their rescuers and protectors. In his proclamation, Hull warned the colonists against joining the British soldiers in fighting the Americans. Hull was quite surprised when the people of Upper Canada refused to allow any American invasion. Upper Canada had an excellent military commander in Sir Isaac Brock. Brock's main priority was to strengthen Upper Canada's defenses. He felt that the only way that Upper Canada could defend itself was by taking Michilimackinac, an island in what is now Michigan. Taking Michilimackinac meant that Upper Canada would control the Upper Great Lakes, which would stop any possible American invasion. And just draw your attention to a close-up on a very iconic painting from the time period. The friendship between Brock and Shawnee chief Tecumseh inspired the British and the First Nations to put aside their differences and fight alongside each other. Brock was right. A large group of 400 First Nations warriors, 200 fur traders, and 46 British officers banded together and confronted the American commander. Brock offered the American commander a chance to surrender before Brock's forces attacked, and he accepted. When Hull heard of this victory, he called off an American invasion and retreated to Detroit. Most of the battles in the War of 1812 took place in Upper and Lower Canada. The people in Upper Canada suffered more because the key battles took place on their land. In total, there were over 170 battles, raids, skirmishes, unplanned fights between small armies or fleets, and campaigns, military operations, during the War of 1812. Let's look now at a few key battles. The Siege of Detroit was an early British victory that helped to solidify alliances between the British and the First Nations. More importantly, Brock developed a close friendship with Tecumseh, the leader of the First Nations forces. Detroit was important to the Americans since it was located between the British forces and their native allies. Hull hoped that setting up camp in Detroit would disrupt communications between the British and the First Nations. In August of 1812, Brock led a few hundred British soldiers, colonists from the Canadas and the Maritimes, and First Nations warriors into Detroit. Although the Americans outnumbered Brock's forces, Brock and Tecumseh made it appear that they outnumbered the Americans. Hull surrendered after heavy British fire. Here's another iconic painting showing William Hull making the offer of surrender. The Americans tried to capture Niagara in Upper Canada so that they could cut off British access to Detroit. The Americans invaded the town of Queenston Heights on the morning of October 13th, 1812. Brock did not have time to assemble a large enough force, but he was able to gather a small number of troops. As the battle raged, Brock was fatally shot, and his troops withdrew. Although Brock was dead, the British and native forces were inspired to regroup under a new major general. A few hours later, a larger force approached the Americans and drove them out when some members of the American militia refused to fight on the Canadian side of the border. This was another key victory for the British, although the loss of Brock was a major blow to the Allied forces. Before the end of 1812, Tecumseh would also die in battle. And I imagine there are a number of you listening to this at home who enjoy going to Niagara Falls with your family to enjoy different holidays or vacation times. And so the next time you go to Niagara Falls, it'll be interesting to just look around as you're driving towards the falls or even walking towards the falls. You'll see a number of signs referring to Lundys Lane, Battle of Queenston Heights, um, and it all goes back to the War of 1812. York, now Toronto, was the capital of Upper Canada. It was also a site where weapons and gunpowder were being stored. It also had a massive warship, the HMS Sir Isaac Brock, under construction. On April 27, 1813, the Americans attacked York, hoping to take the ship and control of the Great Lakes. They defeated the British and native forces and took Fort York and the dockyard. As the British retreated, they set off an explosion that caused the town to burn. The British also destroyed the Isaac Brock so that the Americans could not take it. In August 1814, the British retaliated for the loss of York. They attacked Washington, the capital of the U.S. The British set fire to the President's Mansion, the Library of Congress, the Treasury Building, and the Navy Yard. Only the President's Mansion survived. The only color that could cover the burn marks was white, and the mansion thus became known as the White House. If you take some time to listen to the American National Anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, if you listen to the lyrics carefully or even read the lyrics, there are references to rockets and uh, bombs, and it's actually a reference to the British attacking Washington during the War of 1812. In the Battle of Chateauguay, the Americans tried to invade Montreal and cut off British access to Upper Canada. Their attempt failed due to poor American leadership and communication. Once again, the British were successful in making their forces appear much larger. During the battle, the British blew horns in the woods as a tactic to trick the Americans into thinking that they were outnumbered. The Americans quickly retreated. This battle was significant in that it was the first time that soldiers from Lower Canada, the Voltigeurs, joined forces with soldiers and native warriors from Upper Canada. On a dark night in July 1814, the Battle of Lundys Lane was fought. Due to the lack of light, there was so much confusion on the battlefield that both sides accidentally killed some of their own soldiers. The Americans retreated and set up their defenses at Fort Erie. Despite intense fighting, the British and native forces were unable to defeat the Americans. The Americans later decided to destroy that fort so that it did not fall into British hands and retreated to Buffalo. While there was no clear winner, the British claimed victory at Lundys Lane, and the Americans claimed victory at Fort Erie. So, just to back up everything that I said seconds ago, here's a painting depicting the action in the Battle of Lundys Lane, and this painting represents the goings on during the siege of Fort Erie. There is no way to know the exact human cost of the War of 1812. Official records from 1812 to 1814 are vague. We do know that thousands were killed in the battles, and thousands more died from diseases and other factors stemming from the battles. Some sources estimate that 35,000 British soldiers, American soldiers, and First Nations warriors died in battles and other causes related to the War of 1812. So I've just gone with three images of various War of 1812 memorials. My question to you is, why are these memorials so important today? Something you may want to put the video on pause for a minute to jot down your thoughts, because we'll talk about it in tomorrow's class. Okay, but now it's time for the wrap up. So let's finish today's lesson by considering the following, which we'll then discuss in tomorrow's class. Number one, which battle do you think was the most significant? Why do you feel this way? Question number two, how do you think things changed for Britain, the United States, and the Canadas after the war ended? So, second question is asking you to think a little farther ahead. So, what you're going to do now is put the video on pause so that you can write down your responses to these two questions. If you don't feel comfortable or confident in your ability to do this, it means you need to go back and watch this video at least 2 more times, and then when you're ready, put the video on pause. And as always, I look forward to hearing everybody's responses to these questions, as well as the questions that popped up throughout this video. We'll talk all about these in tomorrow's class, but until then, this does conclude today's video.